Hi, I'm Natasha. Last Tuesday, my husband Trevor thought I was on a business trip to Portland, but I came home early to surprise him for our anniversary. What I found in our bedroom wasn't just another woman. It was my best friend Camille wearing my wedding dress, practicing vows with my husband while my own anniversary gifts sat unopened on the nightstand. But here's what they didn't know. I've been quietly building evidence for months. And what I did next didn't just end their affair, it ended both their careers, their reputations, and cost them everything they thought they'd stolen from me. Keep watching, because when they realized I'd been recording everything, Camille literally fainted, and Trevor, well, let's just say begging doesn't look good on a man who thought he was untouchable. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The October rain had been falling steadily in Millbrook Heights for 3 days straight, turning the suburban streets into rivers of amber light reflected from the street lamps. I'd grown to love this neighborhood over the past 4 years. The way Mrs. Henderson always waved from her garden, how the old oak trees formed a canopy over Maple Grove Drive, the quiet predictability of it all. Trevor and I had saved for 2 years to buy our little colonial house with the blue shutters and white picket fence. It was everything we dreamed about during those late-night conversations when we were just dating, planning our future over takeout containers and cheap wine. That Tuesday evening, I was supposed to be 3 hours away in Portland, sitting through another mind-numbing corporate training seminar about synergistic leadership dynamics, or whatever buzzword-heavy nonsense my marketing firm had decided was essential this quarter. I'd complained to Trevor about it for weeks, how I'd miss our anniversary, how these mandatory sessions were always scheduled at the worst possible times, how I'd rather spend the evening at home with him, maybe ordering from that little Italian place we discovered on our second date. "Don't worry, babe," he'd said just that morning, kissing my forehead as I loaded my overnight bag into my silver Honda Civic. "We'll celebrate when you get back. Maybe I'll plan something special." His smile had seemed genuine, warm, the same smile that had made me fall in love with him 6 years ago when we met at that terrible karaoke night at Murphy's Tavern downtown. But here's the thing about corporate training seminars. Sometimes they get canceled at the last minute due to unforeseen circumstances, which in this case meant the lead trainer, some hotshot consultant from New York, had gotten food poisoning and couldn't make the trip. The email came through just as I was checking in to the Fairfield Inn on Congress Street. "Session postponed until next month. Sincere apologies for the inconvenience." Most people would have been annoyed. I was thrilled. It meant I could surprise Trevor for our anniversary after all. Maybe pick up some champagne and those chocolate-covered strawberries he loved from that bakery on 5th Street. What could be more special than a surprise anniversary reunion? The drive back from Portland usually took about 3.5 hours, but I pushed it a little, eager to get home. The rain had started just outside of Salem, and by the time I reached the outskirts of Millbrook Heights, it was coming down in sheets. I stopped at Rosewood Bakery just before they closed, grabbing Trevor's favorite chocolate eclairs and a bottle of that expensive champagne we'd been saving for a special occasion. What could be more special than a surprise anniversary reunion? Our house sat at the end of Maple Grove Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac where most of our neighbors were either young families like us or retirees who'd lived there for decades. The Morrison family next door had their porch light on, and I could see the blue glow of their television through their living room window. Everything looked normal, peaceful, exactly as it should be at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. Trevor's black BMW was in the driveway, which made sense. He'd said he was planning to work from home that day, catch up on some quarterly reports for his accounting firm. But there was another car parked on the street directly in front of our house, a red Nissan Altima that looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Probably someone visiting the Hendersons, I thought, grabbing my bags and the bakery box. I used my key to unlock the front door quietly, planning to surprise him. The house was warm, welcoming, filled with the faint scent of the vanilla candles I'd lit before leaving that morning. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. My coffee mug still in the sink, Trevor's morning newspaper folded neatly on the kitchen counter. The anniversary card I'd bought him a week ago, hidden in my desk drawer upstairs, waiting for the right moment. But then I heard something that made me freeze halfway through hanging up my coat. Laughter. Female laughter, coming from upstairs. Not just any laughter. The kind of intimate, breathless giggling that I recognized because it used to be mine in the early days of our relationship, when everything felt new and exciting and full of possibility. For a moment, I stood there in our entryway, rain dripping from my jacket onto the hardwood floor we'd spent a weekend refinishing together last spring, trying to process what I was hearing. Maybe it was the television. Maybe Trevor was watching some romantic comedy, though that seemed unlikely. He usually preferred action movies or those true crime documentaries that kept him up too late. But then I heard his voice, low and tender in a way that made my stomach drop. "You're so beautiful in that," he was saying, his words carrying clearly down the stairs. "It looks better on you than it ever did on her." The bakery box slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The champagne bottle somehow survived the fall, rolling across the hardwood until it came to rest against the base of our coat closet. That's when I knew. In that horrible, crystalline moment of understanding, I knew that my marriage, my life, everything I thought I could count on was about to change forever. And the worst part? Part of me had been expecting this moment for months. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The thing about Betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It creeps in quietly, disguised as late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls taken in another room, and sudden changes in routine that your heart notices before your mind catches up. I'd been living with that creeping unease for almost 4 months now, though I'd been pushing it down, telling myself I was being paranoid. Trevor had always been dedicated to his work. It was one of the things I'd initially found attractive about him. He was ambitious, driven, the kind of man who stayed late to perfect a client presentation even when he didn't have to. But somewhere around June, those late nights had become more frequent, and the explanations had become more elaborate. The Pemberton account is absolutely crucial. If we land this one, it could mean a promotion to senior partner. He'd loosen his tie as he walked through our front door at nearly 10 o'clock on what should have been a quiet Thursday evening. He'd kiss my cheek distractedly, already mentally elsewhere, and head straight for the shower while I reheated his dinner for the 3rd time that week. Camille had been my closest friend since our sophomore year at Riverside University, where we'd bonded over terrible dormitory coffee and our shared terror of Professor Martinez's statistics class. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the person I called when I needed to vent about work drama or celebrate small victories. She knew about the time I accidentally dyed my hair orange with a box kit from the drugstore. She knew about my irrational fear of butterflies and my secret addiction to reality TV shows that I was too embarrassed to admit watching. She also knew that Trevor and I had been trying to have a baby for almost a year now, and the constant negative pregnancy tests were starting to wear on both of us. She'd been the one holding my hand in the parking lot of Dr. Richardson's office when we'd gotten the news that there was nothing medically wrong with either of us. Sometimes these things just took time. "Maybe the universe is just waiting for the perfect moment," she had said, squeezing my fingers as I cried quietly in the front seat of her red Nissan. That same red Nissan that was now parked outside my house at 8:30 on a Tuesday night when I was supposed to be 3 hours away in Portland. The hardwood floors in our entryway were original to the house, installed sometime in the 1940s when this neighborhood was first developed for returning soldiers and their young families. Trevor and I had spent countless hours researching the history of our street, learning that Maple Grove Drive had once been considered the height of suburban luxury, with tree-lined sidewalks and matching colonial houses. We'd felt like we were joining something bigger than ourselves, becoming part of a community with roots and traditions. I'd painted the walls myself, a warm sage green that complemented the natural wood tones and made the space feel welcoming rather than cramped. There were framed photos on the narrow console table by the door, our wedding day, a vacation to Yellowstone last summer, the housewarming party we'd thrown when we first moved in. In one picture, Camille and I were laughing over something trivial, our arms around each other's shoulders, both of us slightly tipsy from the champagne punch I'd made following my grandmother's recipe. Standing there now, listening to my husband's voice drift down from our bedroom, I found myself staring at that photograph with a kind of detached fascination. How long had this been going on? How many times had Camille sat at our kitchen table, drinking coffee from the blue ceramic mugs Trevor had bought me for my birthday, listening to me worry about our marriage while secretly knowing exactly why he'd been so distant? The vanilla candles I'd lit that morning were still burning in the living room, filling the house with the same scent I'd chosen for our wedding reception. I could see them flickering through the doorway, casting dancing shadows on the walls we'd painted together during our first month of marriage. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left that morning, but somehow it all felt different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Our house had always been our sanctuary, the place where we planned our future and shared our dreams. The kitchen where Trevor had taught me to make his grandmother's famous lasagna. The living room where we'd spent Sunday mornings reading different sections of the newspaper, my feet tucked under his legs on the sofa. The master bedroom where we'd whispered about the children we hoped to have someday, choosing names and imagining what they might look like. Now, those same spaces felt foreign, contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening here while I was at work, while I was traveling, while I was trusting in the foundation I thought we'd built together. I could hear movement upstairs now, footsteps crossing our bedroom floor, the creak of the old floorboard near the window that we'd always meant to fix but somehow never got around to. There was music playing softly, something classical that I didn't recognize but that sounded formal. Ceremonial. My hands were surprisingly steady as I quietly set down my purse and overnight bag. The champagne bottle had rolled under the coat closet, and I left it there, somehow knowing that this wouldn't be a night for celebration. The chocolate eclairs from Rosewood Bakery lay scattered across the hardwood floor, their delicate pastry shells cracked and oozing cream, a perfect metaphor for everything that was about to be broken. I'd worked so hard to build this life, this home, this marriage. I'd compromised and communicated and tried to be the supportive wife that Trevor seemed to need. I'd put my own career ambitions on hold when his film required longer hours. I'd managed our social calendar, maintained our friendships, kept our house running smoothly while he focused on building his professional reputation. And now, standing in the entryway of the home we'd chosen together, listening to evidence of how thoroughly I'd been betrayed, I realized that all of that effort, all of that trust, all of those small daily acts of love and loyalty had been nothing more than a performance for an audience that was never really watching. But here's what Trevor and Camille didn't know about me. I'd learned a long time ago that the quietest people are often the ones who see everything. And I'd been seeing a lot more than they realized. The classical music grew louder as I climbed the stairs, each step deliberate and silent on the thick carpet runner we'd installed last Christmas. Trevor had insisted on the deep burgundy color, saying it would add elegance to our home. Now it felt like I was walking on blood. My heart wasn't racing the way you'd expect it to in a moment like this. Instead, everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a great distance. The wedding photos lining the stairway wall seemed to mock me as I passed. Images of Trevor and me dancing, cutting cake, surrounded by friends and family who'd believed in our happiness. Camille was in half of these pictures, beaming as my maid of honor, holding my train, catching my bouquet, with that radiant smile I'd thought was genuine joy for my future. The music was coming from our bedroom stereo system, the expensive Bose speakers Trevor had bought himself for his last birthday. It was Pachelbel's Canon in D, the same piece I'd walked down the aisle to 4 years ago.
The same piece that was supposed to be sacred, reserved for the most important moment of my life. I paused at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the polished banister until my knuckles turned white. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway from within. I could hear them clearly now. Not just voices, but the rustle of fabric, the soft clink of jewelry, the intimate sounds of two people who believed they were completely alone and unobserved. "Turn around," Trevor was saying, his voice tender in a way that made my stomach clench. Camille was, "Do you think she'll notice it's been moved?" I tried to put everything back exactly where I found it. "She never pays attention to that stuff," Trevor replied, and I could hear the dismissive shrug in his tone. "Natasha's always so focused on work, she wouldn't notice if we rearranged the entire closet."
The casual cruelty of that statement hit me harder than if he'd screamed. This wasn't just about sex or attraction or a moment of weakness. This was about fundamental disrespect, about viewing me as someone so insignificant that my own possessions could be borrowed and my own space violated without consequence. I pressed myself against the wall and edged closer to the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to preserve whatever was left of my dignity by not witnessing whatever was happening in there. But I couldn't move. I had to know exactly what I was dealing with. Through the crack in the door, I could see our bed, the king-size platform bed we'd saved up for during our first year of marriage, with the white Egyptian cotton sheets I'd bought at a department store sale. Camille was standing in front of our full-length mirror, the one that usually reflected my morning routine as I got ready for work. She was wearing my wedding dress. Not just any white dress, my actual wedding dress, the one I'd spent months choosing, the one hanging carefully preserved in our walk-in closet inside a specialized garment bag. The ivory silk moved like liquid as she turned, the intricate beadwork catching the light from our bedside lamps. She'd even put on my pearl necklace, the one that had been my grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. But it wasn't just that she was wearing my dress. She was practicing walking down an imaginary aisle holding a makeshift bouquet of flowers she must have picked from our garden. White roses from the bush Trevor had planted for a second anniversary, baby's breath from the border I'd designed myself last spring. Trevor was sitting on the edge of our bed, still wearing his work clothes, but with his tie loosened, watching her with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't just lust or infatuation, it was reverence, the kind of look a man gives when he's imagining his future, planning his forever. "Say it again," Camille whispered, stopping her practice walk and turning to face him. "Say what you said earlier about starting over." Trevor stood up and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. In our bedroom, wearing my grandmother's necklace, surrounded by the furniture we'd chosen together and the photos of our life together, he looked into my best friend's eyes and said, "After the divorce is final, we'll have a real wedding. Something perfect, something that actually means something, not like the mistake I made before." The mistake I made before? 4 years of marriage reduced to a mistake? 4 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, quiet Sunday mornings, and all the tiny intimacies that make up a life together, all of it dismissed as casually as if he were talking about choosing the wrong restaurant for dinner? Camille laughed that same bright laugh I'd heard 1,000 times during girls' nights out, movie marathons, and late-night phone calls when one of us needed support. She said, "I can't wait to see Natasha's face when she finds out. She's always been so smug about having the perfect marriage. Remember how she used to give us advice about relationships when we were single? Like she knew some secret the rest of us didn't?" "She's going to be devastated," Trevor said, but he didn't sound sorry about it. He sounded satisfied, like the idea of my pain was somehow gratifying. "She's been so distant lately, so focused on her career, I don't think she's even noticed how disconnected we've become." I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and confront them both, to tear my wedding dress off Camille's body and throw them both out of my house. But something held me back. Not fear, not shock, but a cold, calculating part of my mind that whispered, "Wait, listen, learn everything."
Because this wasn't just about an affair. This was about two people who had been systematically planning to destroy my life, who had been meeting in my home, using my possessions, planning their future, while casually discussing my downfall. This wasn't a moment of passion or a terrible mistake. This was a conspiracy. "Have you thought about how we'll handle the house?" Camille asked, walking over to our dresser and picking up the silver-framed photo of Trevor and me from our honeymoon in Tuscany. She studied it for a moment, then deliberately turned it face down. "I've always loved this place. It would be perfect for us." "Already talked to a lawyer," Trevor said casually, like he was discussing weekend plans. "Apparently, since she makes more money than I do, I might be entitled to alimony. And with the housing market the way it is, we definitely get a good price. Plus, all her investments, her 401k, I helped her set up most of that stuff, so I should get half." They weren't just planning to leave me, they were planning to financially destroy me in the process. Camille sat down at my vanity table, the same one where I did my makeup every morning, where I'd gotten ready for our wedding day 4 years ago. She started removing my grandmother's necklace, handling it with the casual familiarity of someone who'd worn it before. How many times had they been here? How many times had she sat in my space, worn my things, slept in my bed?
"What about her job?" Camille asked, meeting Trevor's eyes in the vanity mirror. "She's so proud of that promotion she got last year. Senior Marketing Director." She said my title with mock reverence, rolling her eyes. Trevor laughed, actually laughed at my professional achievement. "That won't last long once word gets out about her instability. I mean, what kind of woman doesn't notice her husband's having an affair for 6 months? Her colleagues are going to wonder about her judgment, her attention to detail. Hard to trust someone with major accounts when they can't even manage their own personal life." 6 months? They'd been doing this for 6 months, and they'd been planning not just to end my marriage, but to destroy my reputation, my career, my financial security. This wasn't betrayal. This was warfare. But as I stood there in my own hallway, listening to them dismantle my life with the casual efficiency of accountants balancing books, I realized something that would have surprised them if they'd known. I wasn't breaking down. I wasn't falling apart. I was getting angry. And when I got angry, I got strategic. Camille stood up from the vanity and walked back toward Trevor, my wedding dress rustling with each step. "I can't wait to be Mrs. Trevor Blackstone," she said, and I watched him spin her around in a circle, both of them laughing like teenagers planning a prank. Mrs. Trevor Blackstone. She was planning to take not just my husband, not just my home, but my name, my identity. That's when I smiled for the first time since walking into my house. Because Camille and Trevor had made one crucial mistake in all their careful planning. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I backed away from the bedroom door with the same careful silence I'd used to approach it, my mind already racing through possibilities while my body moved on autopilot. The thick carpet muffled my steps as I retreated down the hallway, past the family photos that now felt like evidence of a life that had never really existed, past the guest bathroom, where Camille had probably freshened up before her dress rehearsals in my bedroom. The classical music continued to play upstairs, providing perfect cover for my movements. I descended to the main floor, avoiding the third step from the bottom that always creaked, a quirk of the house that Trevor had never bothered to fix despite my repeated mentions of it. Funny how someone could live with you for 4 years and still not pay attention to the details that mattered to you. I needed to think, but I also needed to act. Standing in my living room, surrounded by the carefully chosen furniture and personal touches that had made this house feel like home, I realized that I was at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. I could confront them now, create a scene, demand explanations and apologies that would ultimately mean nothing. I could pack a bag and leave, start the painful process of divorce and division, and try to salvage whatever pieces I could from the wreckage. Or I could be smarter than both of them combined.
I walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinet where we kept important documents, insurance papers, warranties, the folder containing our mortgage information. Hidden behind the stack of utility bills was something I'd purchased 3 months ago but had never used, a small digital recording device barely larger than a USB drive that I'd bought during a moment of paranoid clarity when Trevor's explanations for his late nights started to feel increasingly rehearsed. I'd felt guilty about buying it, had told myself I was being paranoid and distrustful. I'd hidden it away, hoping I'd never have reason to use it. Now, holding the sleek black device in my palm, I realized that some part of me had known this moment was coming long before my conscious mind was ready to admit it. The device was voice-activated and had enough memory to record up to 8 hours of audio, more than enough for what I had in mind. I slipped it into the front pocket of my jeans and made my way back toward the stairs. But this time, I had a plan. I would need documentation, evidence, proof of exactly what they were planning. Because if Trevor thought he was walking away from this marriage with half of everything I'd worked for while destroying my reputation in the process, he was about to learn that his quiet, trusting wife had been paying much more attention than he realized. But first, I needed to get out of the house without them knowing I'd ever been there. I retraced my steps to the entryway, moving with purpose now rather than shock. The champagne bottle was still under the coat closet where it had rolled. I retrieved it along with my purse and overnight bag, gathering the scattered chocolate eclairs and placing them back in their box. Within minutes, I'd erased most traces of my unplanned arrival. I left through the front door, locking it carefully behind me, and walked to my car with steady steps. Any neighbors watching would see exactly what they'd expect. Natasha returning from her business trip, carrying her luggage and what appeared to be anniversary treats for her husband.
But instead of pulling into our driveway, I drove to the end of Maple Grove Drive and parked under the large oak tree that provided shadows even on the brightest days. From this vantage point, I could see our house clearly while remaining hidden from view. The red Nissan was still parked in front, Camille's car, which I now realized I'd probably seen in our neighborhood more often than I'd consciously registered. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I installed a security app that could access the smart home system Trevor had insisted on setting up last year. He'd been proud of our connected doorbell, the cameras that monitored our front and back entrances, the system that was supposed to make us feel safer and more secure. He'd given me access to everything, assuming I'd never have reason to use it for anything other than checking if packages had been delivered. Now, sitting in my car, under the cover of darkness, I logged into our home security system for the first time. The cameras showed me exactly what I'd expected. Camille's car in front of our house, our front door closed, no sign of activity from the outside. But the system also tracked when doors and windows were opened, when motion was detected, when the security code was disarmed. I scrolled through weeks of data, looking for patterns I'd missed while living through them day by day. The evidence was staggering. Camille's car had been photographed by our smart doorbell camera at least twice a week for the past 4 months, always during times when I was at work or traveling. The front door had been opened and closed during those visits, meaning she wasn't just meeting Trevor elsewhere, she was coming into our home regularly, probably having keys made, treating our house like her second residence. But the most damning evidence was in the camera timestamps from our bedroom. Trevor had positioned one camera to monitor the master suite, claiming it was for security purposes. I'd been uncomfortable with it initially, but he'd assured me it was only activated when we were both away from home. Looking at the footage logs now, I could see that it had been activated during many of Camille's visits, suggesting that Trevor had been recording their encounters in our bedroom. Whether he'd done it for blackmail purposes, for his own personal collection, or simply because he enjoyed the risk, I didn't know. But I did know that those recordings would prove invaluable in any legal proceedings that might follow. I spent another 20 minutes documenting everything I could access remotely: entry logs, camera footage, even the smart thermostat data that showed when the bedroom temperature had been adjusted during times when only Trevor and Camille were supposed to be in the house. Technology that was meant to protect us had instead created a detailed record of their betrayal. Around 9:45 p.m., I saw movement through our living room window. Camille appeared first, now wearing her own clothes again, jeans and the green sweater I'd complimented her on just last week when we'd met for coffee. She was carrying something in her arms, and as she got closer to the front door, I realized it was my wedding dress, carefully folded and protected in what looked like a garment bag. She was taking it with her. The audacity was breathtaking. Not only was she planning to steal my husband and my home, but she was literally stealing my wedding dress, probably planning to alter it for her own ceremony with Trevor. The symbolism was so pointed, so deliberately cruel that I almost admired the thoroughness of it. Trevor appeared a moment later, walking her to her car like a gentleman seeing her date home safely. They stood beside the red Nissan for several minutes, talking quietly, occasionally touching each other's hands or faces with the casual intimacy of an established couple. Finally, they kissed, not passionately, but with the comfortable affection of people who knew they'd see each other again soon. Camille drove away around 10:15 p.m., and Trevor returned to our house. I watched him through the living room window as he straightened cushions, turned off lamps, and generally erased evidence of the evening's activities. Then he disappeared upstairs, probably to shower and prepare for my expected return the following evening. I waited another 15 minutes to make sure he'd settled in for the night, then I started my car and drove to the Fairfield Inn, where my room was still reserved for the night. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide exactly how I was going to use what I'd learned. Because now I understood that this wasn't just about confronting an affair. This was about two people who had systematically planned to dismantle my life while using my own resources to do it. They'd turned my home into their meeting place, my possessions into props for their fantasy future, and my trust into a weapon against me. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd underestimated exactly who they were trying to destroy. I'd spent my entire career in marketing, which meant I understood how to build narratives, how to control information, and how to time revelations for maximum impact. I understood research, documentation, and strategic thinking. Most importantly, I understood that the most effective responses to betrayal weren't emotional. They were systematic. As I checked into my hotel room and began organizing the evidence I'd already gathered, I realized that Trevor and Camille had handed me everything I needed to ensure that their betrayal would cost them far more than they'd ever imagined taking from me. The game was about to change, and they didn't even know they were playing. The hotel room felt sterile and anonymous after the familiar warmth of my own home, but tonight I welcomed the emotional distance it provided. I spread my laptop, phone, and the small recording device across the polyester bedspread and began the methodical work of building a case that would change everything. What Trevor and Camille didn't know about me was that my marketing career had taught me skills that extended far beyond creating campaigns for organic skincare products and boutique fitness studios. I'd spent the last 8 years learning how to research target audiences, analyze behavioral patterns, and most importantly, how to gather and organize information in ways that told compelling, undeniable stories. My most recent promotion to senior marketing director hadn't just been about creativity or client management. It had been about my ability to conduct thorough competitive intelligence. I knew how to find information that people thought they'd hidden, how to connect digital footprints that seemed unrelated, and how to build narratives from data that others might dismiss as coincidental. Now, sitting cross-legged on scratchy hotel sheets with my laptop glowing in the dim room, I turned those professional skills toward the most personal investigation of my life. I started with social media, something I'd rarely paid attention to when it came to my own relationships, but that I analyzed religiously for work. Camille's Instagram account, which I'd occasionally liked posts on but never really studied, told a story I'd been too trusting to see. Scrolling back through 4 months of her posts, I found dozens of subtle hints about her relationship with Trevor. Photos of expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, tagged with locations throughout our city but never mentioning who she was dining with. Wine glasses photographed in pairs, expensive bottles that I knew were beyond her budget as a freelance graphic designer. Designer clothing that had appeared in her wardrobe gradually, pieces that cost more than her typical income could support.
But the most damning evidence was hidden in the background details of her photos. In a selfie from 3 weeks ago, taken in what appeared to be a hotel bathroom, I could see the corner of a familiar toiletry bag, the leather one I'd bought Trevor for our second anniversary. In another photo, a casual shot of her morning coffee, the mug was sitting on a surface I recognized, the granite countertop of our kitchen island. She'd been documenting their relationship in plain sight, confident that I was too oblivious to notice or too trusting to interpret the signs correctly. Trevor's social media presence was more circumspect, but equally revealing once I knew what to look for. His LinkedIn profile showed several new connections over the past few months: divorce attorneys, real estate agents, financial advisors. Professional connections that made perfect sense for someone planning to end his marriage and divide assets. His Facebook activity told a different story than the one he'd been telling me. While he'd been claiming to work late on the Pemberton account, his location data showed him checked in at restaurants, hotels, and even a jewelry store in the neighboring town of Riverside Heights. The jewelry store visit was particularly interesting, dated just 2 weeks ago, around the time he told me he needed to work through the weekend to prepare for a major client presentation. I screenshotted everything, organizing the evidence into folders on my laptop: financial evidence, location data, social media documentation, timeline verification. Each folder grew thicker as I worked through the night, building a comprehensive picture of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. But the real breakthrough came when I accessed our shared financial accounts, something I'd rarely done because Trevor had always handled our money management, claiming he enjoyed the analytical aspects of budgeting and investment tracking. I'd been grateful to let him take care of it, focusing instead on my demanding career and trusting that my husband had our best interests at heart. That trust had been catastrophically misplaced. Our joint checking account showed a pattern of expenditures that made my stomach turn. Expensive hotels charged during weekdays when I was at work. Jewelry purchases that had never resulted in gifts for me. Restaurant bills for amounts that could only have covered dinner for two at the kind of upscale establishments Trevor and I rarely frequented together.
But worse than the affair-related expenses were the financial maneuvers he'd been making without my knowledge. Our savings account, which should have contained nearly $40,000 from my recent bonus and our combined contributions over the past year, had been steadily depleted through transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Following the digital trail deeper, I discovered that Trevor had opened several accounts in his name only, moving money from our joint savings in small increments that wouldn't trigger automatic notifications. He'd been systematically relocating our shared assets to places where I couldn't access them, preparing for a divorce while I remained completely unaware that our marriage was ending. The most shocking discovery was a consultation fee paid to Morrison and Associates, a law firm specializing in high-asset divorce cases. The payment was dated 6 weeks ago, meaning Trevor had been planning his exit strategy long before I'd noticed any problems in our relationship. He'd been living with me, sleeping beside me, discussing our future together, all while actively working to destroy that future behind my back. I also found evidence of a safety deposit box I'd never known existed, opened 3 months ago at a bank across town. The monthly rental fee was being automatically deducted from an account Trevor had apparently set up specifically for his secret financial activities. As I dug deeper into our financial records, I realized that Trevor's deception went beyond just preparing for divorce. He'd been using our joint credit cards to fund his relationship with Camille while simultaneously hiding assets that should have been community property. He wasn't just cheating, he was committing financial fraud on a scale that could result in serious legal consequences. But perhaps the most valuable discovery came when I accessed the cloud storage account Trevor used for work documents. He'd given me the password years ago for practical reasons. Sometimes I needed to print something for him when he was traveling, or access a file when he was stuck in meetings. I'd used it maybe 3 times in our entire marriage, and never for anything more significant than printing a boarding pass. Tonight, I found a folder labeled Personal Legal that contained documents I was never supposed to see.
Draft divorce papers that painted me as an absent, career-obsessed wife who'd contributed little to our marriage. Financial statements that dramatically undervalued our shared assets while inflating Trevor's individual contributions to our household. Character references from mutual friends, including Camille, that described me as cold, distant, and difficult to live with. The divorce papers requested not just half of our shared assets, but alimony payments that would have left me financially devastated. They also included a request for exclusive possession of our house, based on claims that Trevor had made all the mortgage payments and home improvements, claims that were demonstrably false, since I had been the primary breadwinner for the past 2 years. Reading through the legal documents that had been prepared to destroy my financial future, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and hurt that had defined the first few hours of this discovery began to crystallize into something much more dangerous: strategic anger. Because Trevor had made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed that my quiet, trusting wife would be an easy target for financial manipulation and legal maneuvering. He'd prepared to paint me as an absent, career-obsessed wife who'd contributed little to our marriage. What he hadn't considered was that my career had taught me exactly how to fight this kind of battle. I knew how to research, how to document, how to build cases that were impossible to refute. More importantly, I knew how to find information that people thought they'd hidden securely. By 3 a.m., I had enough evidence to not only protect myself in divorce proceedings, but to ensure that Trevor's financial manipulations would result in serious legal consequences for him. The safety deposit box, the hidden accounts, the systematic transfer of marital assets, all of it constituted financial fraud that could result in criminal charges. But I wasn't done yet, because Trevor and Camille hadn't just betrayed my trust, they'd underestimated my capabilities, and that was a mistake they were going to regret for the rest of their lives. As I finally closed my laptop and tried to get a few hours of sleep, I realized that tomorrow would be the beginning of a very different kind of game than the one they thought they were playing. They wanted to destroy my life. I was about to show them what destruction really looked like. I woke up the next morning at 6 a.m., not because of any alarm, but because my mind had been processing information all night like a computer running background programs. The hotel room felt smaller in the daylight, but I welcomed the clarity that came with morning. I had work to do, and for the first time in months, I felt completely focused. Before I could build my case against Trevor and Camille, I needed to understand exactly how long this betrayal had been developing and how many other people might be involved. The evidence I gathered last night was damning, but it was also just the surface layer of what appeared to be a much deeper conspiracy.
I started by calling in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 8 years, but this qualified as an emergency. Then I drove to a coffee shop across town, where I could work without worrying about running into anyone I knew. I needed to dig deeper into the timeline, and I had a growing suspicion that this affair had roots that stretched back much further than 6 months. Using my laptop and the coffee shop's Wi-Fi, I began reconstructing the past year of my life through digital breadcrumbs I'd never paid attention to at the time. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, social media activity, all the mundane documentation of daily life that tells a story when viewed with the right perspective. The pattern that emerged was both more extensive and more calculated than I'd initially realized. Trevor's deception didn't begin 6 months ago. It had been building for over a year, starting with subtle changes that I'd attributed to work stress and natural relationship evolution. The first red flag I'd missed was last Christmas. Camille had been unusually involved in our holiday plans, offering to help with shopping, suggesting restaurants for our anniversary dinner, even volunteering to house sit when we went to visit Trevor's parents. At the time, I'd been grateful for her support, especially since work had been particularly demanding. Now I realized she'd been inserting herself into our relationship systematically, learning our routines, our financial situation, our plans for the future.
Looking back through my text messages with Camille, I found conversations that took on sinister new meaning in light of what I now knew. Messages where she'd asked seemingly innocent questions about Trevor's work schedule, our vacation plans, even our attempts to start a family. She'd positioned herself as my confidant while gathering intelligence that she was sharing with my husband. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed Trevor's phone records through our family plan account. I'd never had reason to look at them before, but as the account holder, I had access to detailed logs of every call and text message. What I found there made everything else pale in comparison. Trevor and Camille had been in contact almost daily for 14 months, long before I'd noticed any problems in our marriage. Their communication had started innocently enough, brief exchanges about birthday party planning or group dinner arrangements, even volunteering to house sit when we went to visit Trevor's parents. At the time, I'd been grateful for her support, especially since work had been particularly demanding. Now I realized she'd been inserting herself into our relationship systematically, learning our routines, our financial situation, our plans for the future. The phone records also revealed something that made my blood run cold. Trevor had been in contact with divorce attorneys since last February, nearly 10 months before I'd had any inkling that our marriage was in trouble. He'd made dozens of calls to legal offices, financial advisors, and even a private investigator whose specialty, according to his website, was asset discovery and high net worth divorces. But perhaps most damaging was the discovery that Trevor had been secretly recording our conversations for months. Phone records showed multiple calls to a digital forensics company that specialized in creating legal documentation from personal recordings. He'd been building a case against me, gathering evidence to support his eventual claims that I was a neglectful wife who cared more about my career than our marriage. The private investigator's involvement explains something that had been nagging at me since last night. How had Trevor known so much about my financial situation, my investment accounts, my retirement planning? I'd always been relatively private about money, handling my own investments and maintaining some financial independence even within our marriage. But the divorce papers I'd found included detailed information about accounts I'd never discussed with him. A quick call to the investigator's office, pretending to be a potential client interested in similar services, confirmed my suspicions. They specialized in comprehensive financial background checks for divorce proceedings, including forensic accounting that could uncover hidden assets and provide detailed reports on spending patterns, investment portfolios, and earning potential. Trevor had been having me investigated like a criminal while sleeping beside me every night for nearly a year. But the investigation had worked both ways, because it had also provided me with detailed documentation of Trevor's own financial activities. The records I'd accessed last night were just the beginning. Through the same family plan that had given me access to his phone records, I could see every financial app he had used, every account he had accessed, every transaction he'd made. And what I found there was evidence of financial fraud on a scale that went beyond marital deception. Trevor had been systematically stealing from his accounting firm for at least 18 months. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here and there, skillfully moved between client accounts in ways that wouldn't be immediately detected. But as his relationship with Camille had intensified, so had his embezzlement. By last month, he was moving thousands of dollars at a time, using sophisticated accounting tricks to hide the theft.
The money was being funneled through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, but the digital trail was still there for someone who knew how to look for it. Trevor was good at hiding his tracks from casual observation, but he wasn't good enough to fool someone with access to his complete digital footprint and the time to analyze it systematically. I realized that Trevor's rush to divorce me wasn't just about being with Camille. It was about escaping detection of his embezzlement before his firm's annual audit. By divorcing me quickly and painting me as a distracted spouse who'd never paid attention to his business affairs, he could create distance between himself and any potential investigation while simultaneously blaming any suspicious financial activity on marital stress and poor decision-making. The scope of his crimes was staggering.
Based on the records I could access, he'd stolen nearly $200,000 from his firm over the past 18 months. Money that had funded his relationship with Camille, paid for the expensive hotels and restaurants, covered the costs of the divorce attorneys and private investigators. But Trevor had made one crucial error in his criminal planning. He'd used our shared devices and accounts to manage parts of his illegal activity. Email confirmations for financial transfers, password recovery messages for suspicious accounts, even GPS tracking data that placed him at locations related to his embezzlement. All of it was accessible through the family accounts and shared services that made our married life convenient. As I sat in that coffee shop, documenting evidence of crimes that could send my husband to prison for several years, and to ensure that Camille would face serious legal consequences as an accessory to his crimes, I realized that I was holding far more power than Trevor had ever imagined possible. He'd spent over a year planning to destroy my life, but in the process, he'd handed me everything I needed to destroy his. The affair with Camille was just the tip of the iceberg. Trevor was a criminal, and his desperate rush to escape his marriage was motivated by much more than love for another woman. He was trying to escape the consequences of felony theft, and he'd planned to use me as his cover story and scapegoat. But I wasn't going to be anyone's scapegoat. Not anymore. By noon, I had enough evidence to send Trevor to prison for several years, and to ensure that Camille would face serious legal consequences as an accessory to his crimes. But I wasn't ready to make my move yet, because I'd learned something important about strategic warfare. The most devastating attacks are the ones your enemies never see coming. Trevor and Camille thought they were playing a game where they held all the advantages. They had no idea that the quiet, trusting wife they'd been deceiving was about to become their worst nightmare. The game was about to change completely, and they wouldn't understand what hit them until it was far too late to defend themselves. The next phase of my plan required precision timing and flawless execution. I couldn't simply dump all the evidence I'd gathered and hope for the best. I needed to orchestrate a series of moves that would systematically dismantle Trevor and Camille's lives while protecting myself from any potential blowback. My first call was to Rebecca Martinez, a former colleague who'd left marketing 3 years ago to become a forensic accountant specializing in white-collar crime. We'd maintained a friendship built on mutual respect for each other's analytical minds, and I knew she'd appreciate the complexity of what I was dealing with. "Natasha?" Rebecca's voice was surprised but pleased when she answered my call. "It's been months. How are you and Trevor doing?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, settling into the corner booth of the coffee shop where I'd spent the morning. "I need your professional opinion on something, and I need to know that this conversation is completely confidential." The change in her tone was immediate. Rebecca had built her reputation on discretion and thoroughness, and she understood that people didn't call forensic accountants for casual advice. "Of course. What's going on?" I spent the next 20 minutes walking her through Trevor's financial activities, sending her screenshots and documentation through encrypted email as we spoke. Rebecca's questions became increasingly sharp as she grasped the scope of what I was describing. "Natasha," she said finally, her voice tight with professional concern, "this isn't just marital misconduct. This is systematic embezzlement with sophisticated money laundering. The amounts you're describing, the time frame, the deliberate concealment, we're talking about federal crimes with serious prison time." "That's what I thought, but I need to know, is the evidence I have enough to guarantee prosecution?" "More than enough," Rebecca said without hesitation. "But you need to be very careful about how you handle this. If Trevor realizes you've discovered his crimes, he might try to destroy evidence or flee. And if his firm doesn't know about the theft yet, they need to be informed immediately to prevent further losses." "What if I told you that I think his divorce timeline is connected to his firm's audit schedule?"
There was a long pause. "Then we're dealing with someone who's planned this very carefully and who might become dangerous when cornered. Natasha, I think you need to involve law enforcement immediately." But I wasn't ready for that yet. Law enforcement would mean losing control of the narrative, and I needed to maintain the element of surprise for what I was planning. "Can you help me organize the evidence in a way that would be most effective for prosecution?
I want to make sure everything is documented properly before I make any moves. Absolutely. But promise me you'll be careful. Financial criminals who feel trapped can become unpredictable. After ending the call with Rebecca, I drove to a print shop across town and spent 2 hours creating multiple copies of every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Bank records, phone logs, social media screenshots, email confirmations, everything organized into color-coded binders that told the complete story of Trevor and Camille's betrayal and his criminal activities. I also made several flash drives containing digital copies of everything, including the security camera footage from our home that showed Camille's frequent visits. These drives went into safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks, ensuring that the evidence would survive even if Trevor somehow discovered what I was doing and tried to destroy my documentation. By late afternoon, I was ready to begin phase 2 of my plan, strategic information placement. My first stop was Hartfield and Associates, Trevor's accounting firm. I didn't go inside. That would come later. Instead, I sat in my car across the street and observed the office building, timing the comings and goings of employees, noting security protocols, and confirming details I'd gathered from Trevor's casual mentions of his workplace over the years. Trevor's boss, Michael Hartfield, was a man I'd met several times at company social events. He was meticulous, ethical to a fault, and absolutely devoted to his firm's reputation. The kind of man who would view employee theft not just as a financial crime, but as a personal betrayal of the trust he placed in his staff. More importantly, Michael was also facing his own professional pressure. Trevor had mentioned several times that the firm was being considered for a major corporate client that would double their revenue, but required extensive background checks and financial transparency. Any hint of internal misconduct would destroy that opportunity and potentially ruin the firm's reputation in their small professional community. I knew exactly how to use that pressure to my advantage. From the parking lot across from Hartfield and Associates, I called their main number and asked to speak with Michael directly. His secretary tried to screen the call, but I used a technique I'd learned in marketing: create urgency without revealing specifics. This is regarding a time-sensitive legal matter that affects the firm directly. I need to speak with Mr. Hartfield today, and he'll want to take this call. Michael came on the line within minutes, his voice professional but slightly tense. This is Michael Hartfield. I understand you have some urgent legal matter to discuss. Mr. Hartfield, this is Natasha Blackstone, Trevor's wife. I'm calling because I've documented evidence of criminal activity that directly involves your firm, and I believe you need to be informed immediately. Michael's voice faltered slightly. Mrs. Blackstone, that's a very serious allegation. Can you be more specific about what you've discovered? I have documented evidence that Trevor has been embezzling money from client accounts for over 18 months. The total amount exceeds $200,000, and I believe it's connected to his current personal situation. I think you need to see this evidence. Michael's voice faltered slightly. Mrs. Blackstone, I'm going to need to ask you to come in to discuss this further. Can you be here within the hour? I can be there in 20 minutes. And Mr. Hartfield, you're going to want to secure Trevor's access to your financial systems before this conversation happens. After ending the call with Rebecca, I sat in my car for a few minutes, steadying my nerves for what was about to happen. I was about to destroy my husband's career and freedom, and while he deserved every consequence that was coming, the magnitude of what I was setting in motion was sobering. But Trevor had made his choices. He'd chosen to steal money from his employer to fund an affair with my best friend. He'd chosen to plan my financial destruction while pretending to love me. He'd chosen to turn our home into a stage for his betrayal and our marriage into a cover story for his crimes. Now he was going to face the consequences of those choices. I gathered the binder containing evidence of Trevor's embezzlement, checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, and walked across the street to Hartfield and Associates. The receptionist was expecting me and led me directly to Michael's corner office where he was waiting with the firm's other senior partner, David Chen, and a woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as their legal counsel.
Mrs. Blackstone? Michael said, standing as I entered. His face was pale and drawn, the look of a man who just learned that his worst professional nightmare might be coming true. Thank you for coming in. Please have a seat and tell us exactly what you've discovered. I placed the binder on his desk and opened it to the first page.
A summary document I'd created that outlined Trevor's crimes in clear, chronological order. "Gentlemen," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, "my husband has been stealing from your firm for 18 months, and I have complete documentation of every transaction." What followed was 90 minutes of systematic revelation that grew more damaging with each piece of evidence I presented. Bank records showing money flowing from client accounts to Trevor's personal holdings, email confirmations for financial transfers that violated every protocol the firm had in place, documentation of the offshore accounts and shell companies Trevor had used to launder the stolen money. By the time I finished, Michael looked like he'd aged 10 years. And the legal counsel was furiously taking notes while asking increasingly technical questions about the evidence I'd gathered. "Mrs. Blackstone," David finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he'd just learned, "this evidence is comprehensive. How long have you known about Trevor's activities? I discovered it yesterday. I've spent the last 24 hours documenting everything I could find. And Trevor has no idea that you know? None whatsoever. As far as he knows, I'm still on a business trip in Portland and won't be home until tonight." Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. "We're going to need to involve law enforcement immediately. This level of theft, the sophistication of the money laundering, this is a federal case." "I understand, but I want to make sure Trevor can't destroy evidence or flee before he's arrested. He's been planning this for over a year, and he's demonstrated that he's willing to go to extraordinary lengths to avoid consequences." The legal counsel looked up from her notes. "What do you recommend?" I smiled for the first time since walking into their office. "I recommend we set a trap that he'll never see coming." The plan we developed in Michael Hartfield's office was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. While the lawyers prepared for law enforcement involvement, I would return home as scheduled, acting as though nothing had changed. Trevor would have one final evening to enjoy his illusion of control before his world collapsed entirely. But I wasn't going home empty-handed. Michael had agreed to let me use the firm's resources to set up what we called the documentation phase, a carefully orchestrated evening that would capture Trevor's confessions and give law enforcement everything they needed for an airtight case. The firm's legal counsel, Janet Morrison, had connections with the FBI's white-collar crime unit, and she assured me that agents would be standing by throughout the evening, ready to move the moment we had sufficient evidence. But the timing had to be perfect. If Trevor suspected anything before we were ready, he could still destroy evidence or flee. I left Hartfield and Associates at 6 p.m. with 3 small recording devices provided by their security consultant, each one no larger than a button and virtually undetectable when properly placed. One would go in our bedroom, one in Trevor's home office, and one in the kitchen, where we typically had our most serious conversations. The device was voice-activated and had enough battery life to record for 12 hours continuously.
"I was thinking we could finally have that anniversary dinner," Trevor called from upstairs. "I know we missed the actual date because of your trip, but I made reservations at Chez Laurent for tomorrow night, the place you've been wanting to try." The casual mention of our anniversary hit me like a physical blow. He was planning a romantic dinner to celebrate our marriage while actively working to destroy it. The audacity was staggering, but it also gave me the perfect opening for what I needed to accomplish. "That sounds wonderful," I called back, placing the second recording device in his home office behind a stack of client files. "But maybe we should talk about some things first. I've been thinking a lot about our relationship lately." When Trevor came back downstairs, his expression had shifted slightly, still smiling, but with a wariness around his eyes that suggested he was trying to gauge my mood. "Oh? What kind of things?" I settled onto our living room couch, patting the cushion beside me in invitation. Trevor joined me, but I noticed he sat slightly farther away than usual, his body language subtly defensive even as he maintained his loving husband facade. "I've been thinking about trust," I began, watching his face carefully, "about how important it is in a marriage, and how easy it can be to take each other for granted." Trevor's smile became more forced.
That's pretty heavy for a Wednesday night after a business trip. Did something happen in Portland? Nothing happened in Portland, I said truthfully, but being away gave me time to think about us, about our future. Trevor, do you ever worry that we're drifting apart? The question was designed to make him reveal information while allowing him to maintain his cover story. If he was planning to leave me anyway, he might be tempted to share some version of his real feelings, especially if he thought he was controlling the conversation. I don't think we're drifting apart, Trevor said, but his tone was careful, measured. Why would you think that? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're both so focused on our careers that we forget to focus on each other. Like, I realized in Portland that I don't even know what you're working on lately. That big account you mentioned, Pemberton, how is that going? Trevor's reaction was immediate and telling. His shoulders tensed slightly and he looked away before answering. It's complicated. Actually, there have been some changes at the firm lately, some restructuring that might affect my position. This was new information. Trevor had never mentioned any restructuring, and it wasn't consistent with what I'd learned about Hartfield and Associates during my research. Either he was creating a cover story for his eventual departure, or something else was happening that I didn't know about. What kind of restructuring? I asked, keeping my voice concerned rather than suspicious. Just budget adjustments. You know how it is in professional services. Clients change their needs and we have to adapt. Trevor stood up abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I'm going to open some wine, that bottle of Pinot Grigio you like. While Trevor was in the kitchen, I placed the third recording device in our bedroom, tucking it behind the alarm clock on his nightstand. Every conversation we had for the rest of the evening would be documented, creating a record that could be used in both criminal and divorce proceedings. When Trevor returned with wine glasses, I decided to escalate the conversation. The recording devices were in place, and I needed to start drawing out information that would be valuable to investigators. Trevor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His hand froze halfway to his mouth, the wine glass suspended in midair. Okay, he said slowly. Are you happy in our marriage? The question hung between us like a live wire. Trevor set down his wine glass and studied my face, clearly trying to determine what had prompted this line of inquiry and how much I might know. That's a big question. Why are you asking? Because I care about you, and I care about us. And if you're not happy, if there's something missing from our relationship, I want to know about it. I want us to work through whatever problems we might have. Trevor was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. He could continue lying, maintaining the charade until he was ready to implement his exit strategy, or he could use this opening to begin preparing me for the divorce he was planning, perhaps testing how I might react to news that our marriage was in trouble. Natasha, I think we've both been avoiding some difficult truths about our relationship. What kind of truths?
We want different things. You're focused on your career, which is great, but it doesn't leave much room for the kind of partnership I need. And I've been wondering if we're really as compatible as we thought we were when we got married. The words should have hurt, but instead, they felt like victory. Trevor was beginning to reveal his real feelings, and every word was being recorded. But I needed him to go further, to incriminate himself in ways that would be useful for both the criminal investigation and the divorce proceedings. What do you mean by the kind of partnership you need? I asked. Trevor hesitated, clearly calculating how much he could safely reveal. I mean someone who's more present, more invested in building a life together rather than just pursuing individual goals. Are you saying I haven't been invested in our marriage? I'm saying maybe we've grown apart more than either of us wanted to admit. I could see where this was heading. Trevor was laying the groundwork for painting me as an inattentive wife who had driven him away through neglect.
It was the same narrative I'd seen in the divorce papers I'd discovered, and hearing him voice it in person made me realize just how completely he had deceived himself about our relationship. But I wasn't finished with him yet. The evening was just beginning, and by the time it was over, Trevor would have given me everything I needed to ensure that his betrayal would cost him far more than he had ever imagined possible. "So, what are you suggesting we do about it?" I asked, setting the trap for the next phase of our conversation. Trevor's answer would determine just how devastating the rest of the evening would become. Trevor's eyes shifted away from mine as he considered his response, and I could see him making calculations about how much truth he was willing to reveal. The recording devices hidden throughout our home were capturing every word, every pause, every subtle admission that would soon become evidence in multiple legal proceedings. "I think," he said slowly, "that maybe we need to consider whether this marriage is working for either of us anymore." The words hung in the air between us, and I let the silence stretch just long enough to seem like genuine shock. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" "I'm saying maybe we should be honest about the fact that we've become different people than we were when we got married." Trevor reached for his wine glass, taking a larger sip than usual. "Natasha, when was the last time you felt truly excited about our future together?" It was a masterful deflection, turning my question back on me while positioning himself as the reasonable party who was simply acknowledging difficult realities. But I needed him to be more specific, more incriminating. "I thought we were building something together," I said, allowing hurt to creep into my voice. "The house, our careers, talking about starting a family. When did you stop wanting those things?" "I never stopped wanting them, but I started wanting them with someone who actually wanted to build them with me." "What does that mean?" Trevor set down his wine glass and turned to face me fully, his expression shifting into something I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold assessment that made me realize I'd never really known my husband at all. "It means I've met someone who understands what partnership actually looks like. Someone who doesn't see relationships as something to fit around the edges of everything else that matters to them." My heart was racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was exactly what I needed. Trevor admitting to the affair on record, but I needed him to go further. "You've met someone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." The word came out flat, matter of fact, like he was confirming a dinner reservation. "How long has this been going on?" Trevor had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but he didn't back down. "Long enough to know that what we have isn't working, and what I could have with her is everything I've been missing." "Who is she?" The pause that followed was the longest yet. Trevor was weighing whether to reveal Camille's identity, and I could see him deciding that full disclosure might actually work in his favor. If he was planning to divorce me anyway, maintaining the pretense of secrecy was no longer necessary. "It's Camille," he said finally. I stared at him in what I hoped looked like stunned disbelief rather than strategic satisfaction. "Camille? My Camille? My best friend, Camille?" "She was your friend, but she's become much more important to me than that." "How could you do this? How could both of you do this to me?"
Trevor's expression hardened, and for the first time that evening, I saw a glimpse of real anger. Not guilt or regret, but irritation at having to deal with my reaction to his choices. "Because we fell in love," he said, as if that explained everything. "Because sometimes life doesn't follow the neat little plans we make, and you have to be willing to make difficult decisions when you find something real." "Something real?" I repeated. "What we had wasn't real?" "What we had was comfortable," Trevor said, his voice growing colder with each word. "It was safe and predictable and ultimately empty.
Being with Camille has shown me what it feels like to be truly understood by someone, to be with someone who actually prioritizes our relationship. I needed to push him further, to get him to reveal the full scope of what they'd been planning. So what happens now? You just leave? We just end our marriage so you can be with my best friend? We end our marriage so I can be with the woman I love, Trevor corrected. And yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. What about the house, our finances, everything we've built together? This was the crucial moment. I needed Trevor to reveal his financial plans, ideally including some admission of the embezzlement that would tie his criminal activities to his personal motivations. Trevor's smile was cold and calculating, and for the first time that evening, I saw a glimpse of real anger. Not guilt or regret, but irritation at having to deal with my reaction to his choices. "What we've built together," he repeated. "Natasha, you've been so focused on your own career that you have no idea what I've been building. While you were claiming the corporate ladder and traveling for work, I was making strategic decisions about our future, our real future, not these fantasies about suburban bliss and baby names." "What kind of strategic decisions?" "The kind that ensure I won't be starting over from nothing when this marriage ends." Trevor stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood with what appeared to be satisfaction. "Do you really think I've been sitting around waiting for you to remember you had a husband? I've been planning, Natasha. I've been preparing for the reality that this marriage was going to end." "Preparing how?" Trevor turned back to face me, and his expression was triumphant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Let's just say that when our divorce is final, you're going to discover that your loyal, supportive husband was much better at financial planning than you ever realized." The admission was vague, but damning, especially combined with the evidence I'd already gathered about his embezzlement. But I needed something more specific. "I don't understand. Are you saying you've been hiding money from me?" "I'm saying I've been protecting assets that you never bothered to pay attention to." Trevor returned to the couch, sitting closer to me than he had all evening, his confidence apparently restored by the confession he had just made. "You want to know the truth, Natasha? While you were playing marketing executive and traveling to important meetings, I was making strategic decisions about our future, our real future, not these fantasies about suburban bliss and baby names." "What kind of strategic decisions?" "The kind that ensure I won't be starting over from nothing when this marriage ends." Trevor stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood with what appeared to be satisfaction. "Do you really think I've been sitting around waiting for you to remember you had a husband? I've been planning, Natasha. I've been preparing for the reality that this marriage was going to end." "Preparing how?" Trevor turned back to face me, and his expression was triumphant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Let's just say that when our divorce is final, you're going to discover that your loyal, supportive husband was much better at financial planning than you ever realized." The admission was vague, but damning, especially combined with the evidence I'd already gathered about his embezzlement. But I needed something more specific. "I don't understand. Are you saying you've been hiding money from me?" "I'm saying I've been protecting assets that you never bothered to pay attention to." Trevor returned to the couch, sitting closer to me than he had all evening, his confidence apparently restored by the confession he had just made. "You want to know the truth, Natasha? While you were playing marketing executive and traveling to important meetings, I was making strategic decisions about our future, our real future, not these fantasies about suburban bliss and baby names."
Every word was being recorded. Every admission was documenting his crimes. And with each revelation, I realized that Trevor's downfall would be even more complete than I'd originally planned. By the time he finished talking, I had enough evidence to destroy him utterly. But the evening wasn't over yet, because I still had one final surprise that would ensure Trevor understood exactly who he'd been underestimating all along. The dawn of reckoning had finally arrived, though Trevor didn't know it yet. He'd fallen asleep on the couch sometime after midnight, exhausted by his own confessions and apparently satisfied that he'd finally been honest with me about the destruction he'd been planning. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought his honesty had been a gift to our relationship, when in reality it had been a signed confession to multiple felonies. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through the final details of what would unfold over the next few hours. The recording devices had captured everything: Trevor's admissions of embezzlement, his detailed descriptions of how he'd hidden stolen money, his casual discussion of destroying my financial future, and his complete confession to the affair with Camille. At 6 a.m., I quietly retrieved the 3 recording devices, transferring their contents to my laptop while Trevor continued sleeping. The files went immediately to encrypted cloud storage, with copies sent to Rebecca Martinez, the FBI agent Janet Morrison had connected me with, and the lawyers at Hartfield and Associates. By 7 a.m., I was dressed for what would be the most important performance of my life. I looked professional but approachable, the image of a woman who had discovered terrible truths but was handling them with dignity and strength. Trevor woke up just after 7:30, stretching on the couch and looking momentarily confused about where he was. When he saw me fully dressed in the kitchen, his expression shifted to mild concern. "You're up early?" he said, his voice hoarse from sleep and wine. "Did I fall asleep out here? I'm sorry, last night was intense." "Yes, it was," I agreed, pouring myself coffee with steady hands. "Trevor, I think we need to continue our conversation from last night, but I'd like to do it properly this time." Something in my tone made him sit up straighter. "What do you mean, properly?" "I mean with complete honesty from both of us, because last night, while you were telling me about your affair with my best friend, you left out some important details." Trevor's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila folder I'd prepared that morning. I opened the folder and spread its contents across our kitchen table. Bank statements showing his embezzlement, screenshots of his financial transfers, documentation of his hidden accounts, and photos of Camille wearing my wedding dress taken from our home security system. Trevor stared at the evidence spread before him, his face cycling through shock, fear, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as he tried to determine how much I knew and what his options might be. "How did you—" Stop, realizing that the question would only confirm his guilt. "How did I find out about your criminal activities? Trevor, you've been using our shared devices and accounts to manage your embezzlement operation. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to access the same information you've been working with?" "Natasha, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but absolutely firm. "You've done enough explaining. Now it's my turn to talk, and your turn to listen." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, setting it on the table between us. Trevor's eyes fixed on the device like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. "You recorded me?" he finally managed. "I recorded everything. Your confessions to embezzling over $200,000 from your firm, your detailed descriptions of the money laundering operation you've been running, your admission that you've been planning this divorce for over a year while stealing marital assets. All of it." Trevor lurched to his feet, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "You can't use that. I didn't consent to being recorded."
Actually, in this state, I only need one party's consent to record a conversation. And since I was a party to the conversation, Everything you said is perfectly legal evidence. I smiled, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw Trevor look at me with something approaching fear. But here's the really interesting part, Trevor. While you were confessing to crimes, I was simultaneously providing that information to the FBI. The blood drained from Trevor's face so completely that for a moment I thought he might faint, just like Camille would when she discovered what was coming for her. "The FBI?" he whispered. "Agent Patricia Coleman, White Collar Crime Unit. She's been very interested in the evidence I've provided about your embezzlement activities. So interested, in fact, that she's prepared arrest warrants for both you and Camille as an accessory to your financial crimes." Trevor collapsed back into his chair, his hands shaking as the full scope of his situation became clear. "Camille doesn't know about the money. She's not involved in that part. Isn't she?" I pulled out another document, bank records showing deposits to Camille's personal account that corresponded exactly with Trevor's theft timeline. These deposits to her account, always just under the amount that would trigger reporting requirements, suggest otherwise. Did you think I wouldn't trace where the stolen money went? "Those were gifts," Trevor said desperately. "Personal gifts between us. She didn't know where the money came from." That might be believable if you hadn't also used stolen money to pay for the hotel rooms where you met, the restaurants where you dined, and the jewelry store where you bought her an engagement ring 3 weeks ago. I placed the receipt for the ring on the table. "Yes, Trevor, I found that too." Trevor was staring at the evidence like a man watching his life collapse in real time, which was exactly what was happening. But I wasn't finished yet. "There's something else you should know," I continued. "Yesterday afternoon, I met with Michael Hartfield and the other partners at your firm. They've been conducting their own investigation since I provided them with evidence of your crimes. And they've discovered that your embezzlement was even more extensive than I initially realized." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've stolen over $300,000, not $200,000. I mean, your firm is facing potential bankruptcy because of your actions. And I mean that Michael Hartfield is personally devastated because he trusted you like a son. And you repaid that trust by stealing from him and his partners." Trevor's face crumpled, and for the first time since I'd known him, he began to cry. Not the tears of remorse or guilt, but the tears of a man who'd finally realized that his careful planning had led to his complete destruction. "The FBI will be here within the hour," I said quietly. "They'll be arresting you on charges of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. Depending on how cooperative you are, you're looking at between 5 and 15 years in federal prison." "And Camille?" "They'll arrest her this morning as well. The evidence shows she knowingly benefited from your crimes and helped you conceal them. At minimum, she's looking at accessory charges and conspiracy." Trevor looked up at me through his tears, and I saw something I'd never seen before: complete defeat. "Why didn't you just leave? Why did you have to destroy everything?" The question was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality that I almost laughed. "I didn't destroy anything, Trevor. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided to steal money to fund an affair with my best friend. You destroyed it when you used our home as a stage for your betrayal. You destroyed it when you planned to divorce me while painting me as the villain in our marriage." I stood up and gathered the evidence from the table, leaving only the recording device running between us. "But you made one crucial mistake in all your planning." "What mistake?" "You assumed that your quiet, trusting wife was weak. You assumed that because I didn't demand attention or create drama, I was someone who could be easily discarded and financially destroyed without consequences." I met his eyes one final time. "You were wrong." The sound of cars pulling into our driveway interrupted whatever Trevor might have said next. Through the kitchen window, I could see 3 black SUVs with government plates, and agents in suits were already walking toward our front door. "That would be the FBI," I said, checking my watch. "Right on time." Trevor stared at me with something approaching awe, as if he was finally seeing me clearly for the first time in our relationship. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman who spent 4 years loving you completely, supporting your career, and building a life that I thought we both wanted. But more importantly,
I'm the woman who documented every crime you committed and every lie you told. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by authoritative knocking.
I'm also the woman who's about to watch you face the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. As I walked to answer the door, I could hear Trevor behind me, his voice broken and desperate. "Natasha, please, we can work this out. I can fix this." But it was far too late for fixing anything. Trevor had made his choices, and now he would live with the results. The FBI agents were professional and thorough, their arrest of Trevor proceeding exactly as Agent Coleman had described when we'd spoken that morning. As they led him away in handcuffs, I realized that this was the last time I would see my husband as a free man. By afternoon, the news had spread throughout our social circle, our neighborhood, and both of our professional communities. Trevor Blackstone, respected accountant and trusted community member, had been arrested for embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his firm. His accomplice and lover, Camille Rodriguez, had been arrested as an accessory to his crimes. The woman who had exposed them both? She was simply continuing with her life, having learned that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own actions. 6 months later, I sold our house and moved across the country to take a position as chief marketing officer for a technology startup. Trevor was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Camille received 3 years for her role in concealing his crimes. As for me, I learned that betrayal, while painful, can also be liberating. It freed me from a marriage that was built on deception and from relationships that were never as genuine as I'd believed. But most importantly, I learned that quiet people aren't weak people. We're just people who choose our moments carefully. And when we finally choose to speak, the world listens. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.